there will be some natural base effect playing out for many of these commodities, I think, which will be more visible in the first quarter or the last quarter of this year, I would say. The pressures in inflation in India are very different from the global pressures. I think there it is the demand picking up, and then I think causing there is a demand supply mismatch. Here, I think the demand is quite weak. I mean, it is essentially cost push, and right now, I mean, our assessment is that the cost push pressures will continue to play out for some time, and the pass-through will be there because companies also will try to protect their margins as much as they can. So I think the next few quarters could see the pressure on pass-through pressure also continue to play out. So I think right now
so
the global economy
annual average would be
5.3, I think, and this is again, as Anubhuti was saying, I think it's premised on a somewhat softer food inflation because last fiscal the food inflation was quite high, so there is a base effect, and on top of that, I think the problem with food is that the cereals are soft, but the proteins are both animal and vegetable.
Yes.
Yeah, they're quite high, and this disturbance in rainfall doesn't augur well too much for vegetable proteins. I mean, it could, because they are rainfall dependent. I mean, the pulses.
SkyMet told us today that they are still not changing the overall normal monsoon forecast, but much will depend on the rains showing up before the Kharif season gets too late into July. At the moment, they're not still worried about cropping patterns, but we have to wait and see. Samir, what is your sense about the Reserve Bank's policy looking at this inflation number? You think that they can remain accommodative as they were in June? And when do you see the first impact on tightening liquidity, or at least normalizing liquidity?
So I think, Lata, from the RBI's perspective, I would actually look at the minutes more than the policy. If you look at the last time's minutes, two of the external members were saying that they are increasingly looking at being data dependent. So that is what I would look at in terms of how the policy shapes up. And in terms of movement of RBI, my sense is that you would see towards Q4, when perhaps the gap between repo rate and reverse repo rate needs to be shortened back to the earlier levels of 25 basis points, setting the stage for an eventual repo rate hike in April perhaps. Mm-hmm. And before that, the difference between the call rate as well as the operating rate as well as the reverse repo rate, which is very high right now. Mm. So because the call rates have moved closer to the reverse repo rate, that also needs to be pitched up with the change in the...
So you are expecting a repo hike by April next year?
Yes.
And the reverse repo hike... Reverse repo?
Should ideally happen sometime in January.
Okay. Jayesh, how will the bond market look at all this? I mean, will you all expect that at the moment you don't have to worry about any of the rate hikes or liquidity changes because the Reserve Bank will be reassured by this number? Just broadly, what is the reaction in the market, if at all, tomorrow, and in which instruments?
So I think the market will be okay about it because, as you said, August, we won't expect any changes. And of course, one has to also keep in mind what's happening in US, right? Long-term inflation forecast has kind of come off dramatically. You might have some spike when the normalization happens, but bond yields are suggesting something different globally. And I don't see why India would be any different. It is supply side disruption. But when we open up, there would be a good spike on inflation. And now at that point of time, we have to see what the global bank, what the US bank, Federal Reserve does. And similarly, I think we would be more dependent on what happens globally rather than what happens locally.
Okay. Oh, yes, of course, there is that. And the US yields have not been all that unkind. They fell to 1.25 and now are back at about 1.36. So it looks like it's signaling normalcy, a good medium, a good mean between the extremes of growth threats and inflation threats at this point in time. The core inflation number is flashing, and from Informist, that is, they are calculating it at 6.2% compared to 6.4 in May. I have completely ignored the IIP number, so let me just read that out to you. IIP itself is seen up 29.3% compared to the CNBC TV 18 poll of 33%. So it's a little lower than expected, but if you looked at the index number at 116.6, the index number is as bad as it was in July of last year. This is not very helpful because it's a steep fall from the April levels, but we shouldn't be surprised. May was a time when many of us couldn't even stir out of our homes. So a fall in industrial output of May from April levels is a good, about 8% fall. If you looked at the month-on-month comparison, 126.7 has become 116.6. So the fall is about 8% from April levels. But I don't know, Anubhuti, should we take this IIP number very seriously? Is there any comment you want to make on the IIP?
Lata, as you very rightly pointed out, I think the YOY numbers really don't give us too much of an indication on how the activity is doing. I think it's far better to focus on high frequency indicators, which gives us a better picture on how growth is recovering. So based on our understanding, probably we are back to September, October levels of economic activity at the end of June, and it has improved further in the first 10 days of July. Besides the high frequency indicators, I think what will matter much more is the corporate earnings, because that has a larger weightage when we talk about our GDP growth projections. And that has been doing well, and the outlook also is pretty good. So those numbers will play a larger role. This number, I would say, it's distorted by base effect, so makes it difficult to interpret. But all said and done, this will feed into our June GDP growth forecast, which everyone is expecting in high teens.
So some 18% is your number?
Yeah, we are looking at around 16%.
Okay.
For the June quarter.
Q1 growth. And your full year GDP number would be?
We are cautious, so we are factoring in a growth number of 8.5% for FY22.
Okay, and this IIP number obviously is not going to make you alter that number.